The rain on Nexus Station fell in sheets of acid that could eat through most metals in minutes. Captain Marcus Chen pulled his hood tighter as he walked through the lower districts, where the desperate and discarded came to disappear. The human had been running cargo between the Outer Rim colonies for 15 years, and he'd seen every kind of misery the galaxy could produce. But tonight felt different. His ship, the Wandering Star, sat in Docking Bay 93, waiting for repairs that would take another week. The hyperdrive had finally given up after years of pushing beyond safe limits, and Marcus was stuck on this cesspit of a station until he could afford the replacement parts. His credit account showed exactly 47 universal credits, barely enough for basic rations. As he turned the corner into Maintenance Alley, he nearly tripped over something in the shadows. 3 small forms huddled together behind a dumpster, trying to stay out of the acid rain. Marcus stopped and looked closer. Aliens, definitely, but young ones. Children, maybe, though it was hard to tell what species he didn't recognize. The first was clearly Zephyrian, with pale blue skin and the characteristic silver markings around her eyes. Her clothes were torn and dirty, hanging off her thin frame. She couldn't have been more than 16 in human years. The second was a Chthoni, her cat-like features and pointed ears making her species obvious even in the dim light. Her fur was matted and wet, and she shivered constantly. The third was the most unusual of Viridian, with green-tinted skin and the bioluminescent patches that marked her people. But her glow was dim, almost dead, which meant she was either very sick or very hungry. "Hey," Marcus said softly, crouching down. "You 3 okay?" The Zephyrian looked up, her large violet eyes wide with fear. She said something in her native language, but Marcus's translator had been on the fritz for months. He held up his hands to show he meant no harm. English, he tried. "Galactic Standard?" The Chthoni spoke up, her voice barely a whisper. We understand. Please, human, we mean no trouble. We go away if you want." Marcus shook his head. "I'm not telling you to go anywhere. Just wondering if you're hurt." The 3 exchanged glances, clearly unsure whether to trust him. Marcus couldn't blame them. Humans had a reputation in this part of the galaxy, and not always a good one. Too many pirates and slavers wearing human faces had made first contact difficult for legitimate traders like himself. "Look," Marcus said, sitting down on an old crate to make himself less threatening. "I'm not station security, I'm not immigration, and I'm definitely not slave traders. I'm just a guy whose ship is broken, waiting for parts. My name's Marcus." The Zephyrian spoke again, and the Chthoni translated. "She says her name is Lyra. I am Kira. Our friend is Zara." She pointed to the Viridian, who hadn't spoken at all. "Nice to meet you all," Marcus said. "Mind if I ask why you're hiding behind a dumpster in the rain?" Kira's ears flattened against her head. We have nowhere else to go. The slavers who brought us here, they said we were too small, too weak to sell. They left us." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Child trafficking was supposed to be illegal throughout the Galactic Federation, but enforcement was spotty at best, especially on frontier stations like Nexus. "How long ago?" 3 days, Lyra said in heavily accented Galactic Standard. She held up 3 fingers to make sure he understood. 3 days without food or shelter. Marcus looked at their faces, saw the desperation and fear, and made a decision that would change all their lives. "Come on," he said, standing up. "Let's get you somewhere dry." "Where?" Kira asked suspiciously. "My ship. It's not much, but it's got heat and food." The 3 girls looked at each other again. Marcus could practically see them weighing their options. Trust the strange human, or stay in the rain and slowly starve. Finally, Zara spoke for the first time, her voice musical despite her obvious exhaustion. "We will come," she said in perfect Galactic Standard. "Thank you, human Marcus." Marcus led them through the winding corridors of the station's lower levels, avoiding the main thoroughfares where station security might ask questions. The Wandering Star wasn't impressive from the outside, just another beat-up freighter that had seen better decades. But inside, it was home. The cargo hold was empty except for some emergency supplies and his personal belongings. The main corridor led to the engine room in the back, the cockpit up front, and the small living quarters he'd carved out in the middle. It wasn't designed for passengers, but it would do. "Showers through there," Marcus said, pointing to a small door. "There's soap and clean towels. I'll see what I can find for clothes and food." The girl stood in his main room, dripping and shivering, clearly overwhelmed. Marcus realized they probably hadn't been in a safe space in months, maybe years. "It's okay," he said gently. "Nobody's going to hurt you here. Take your time." While they took turns cleaning up, Marcus rummaged through his storage compartments. He found some old coveralls that would be too big but better than their current rags. In the food stores, he had enough ration bars and synthesized protein to feed them for a few days, at least until he figured out what to do next. When they emerged from the shower area, clean but still wearing the oversized coveralls, Marcus got his first good look at them. They were definitely young, probably between 14 and 17 in human years. All three showed signs of malnutrition and abuse, but there was something else in their eyes now, a tiny spark of hope. "Better?" Marcus asked. Lyra nodded vigorously. "Much better. Thank you." Marcus handed out ration bars and cups of hot synthetic tea. They ate hungrily but politely, clearly trying not to seem desperate despite their obvious starvation. "So," Marcus said, settling into his pilot's chair. "What's your story? How did you end up on a slave ship?" The girls exchanged looks again, and Kara spoke first. "My parents sold me. Too many cubs, not enough food on HFY Prime." Lyra was next. "Pirates raided my colony ship. Killed the adults, took the children." Zara's story was the worst. "My people were conquered. The hegemony said we were too primitive to govern ourselves. They took the young ones to educate us in proper civilization." Marcus had heard variations of these stories before, but it never got easier. The galaxy was a harsh place for small, weak species. Humanity had been lucky; they developed spaceflight and weapons technology quickly enough to defend themselves when they made contact with the broader galactic community. Not every species was so fortunate. "Well," Marcus said, "you're safe now. At least until I figure out what to do next." "What do you mean?" Zara asked. Marcus ran a hand through his graying hair. "Look, I'd love to help you get home, but I'm barely scraping by here. My ship needs major repairs, I'm almost broke, and even if I could afford passage somewhere, I don't know where you'd want to go." "We cannot go home," Lyra said quietly. "Even if ships go there, our families think we are dead. Or worse, they think we brought shame by being taken." Kira nodded. "The Kithani do not take back cubs who have been with outsiders. It is law." "The hegemony would recapture me if I returned to Viridian space," Zara added. "I am considered a runaway slave." Marcus stared at them. 3 kids with nowhere to go, no money, no legal status, and no way home. In most systems, they'd end up in refugee camps at best, or back in the hands of slavers at worst. "There has to be somewhere," he said. "Family, friends, someone who would take you in?" All 3 shook their heads. Lyra spoke for the group. "We have talked about this for many days. There is nowhere for us in the galaxy. We are, what is the word, disposable." The word hit Marcus like a physical blow. Disposable. That's exactly what they were, according to the cold calculations of galactic society. Too young to work effectively, too foreign to integrate easily, too poor to matter to anyone in power. Marcus looked around his small ship, did some quick mental calculations. The cargo hold could be converted into living space without too much trouble. He'd been planning to sell the Wandering Star anyway once he saved enough for a newer model. The ship was getting old, but she was still spaceworthy. "What if," he said slowly, "what if you stayed here? With me, I mean. I could use help around the ship, and you'd have a place to live while you figure out what you want to do with your lives." The silence stretched for a long moment. Then, Kira asked, "Why would you do this? You do not know us. We cannot pay you." Marcus thought about it. Why was he doing this? He'd spent most of his adult life avoiding exactly this kind of complication. No crew, no passengers, no responsibilities except to himself and his cargo. But, looking at these three kids, seeing the hope and fear warring in their expressions, he realized he couldn't walk away. Because someone should, he said finally. Because you're people, not cargo. And, because. He paused, remembering his own childhood on New Shanghai, the colony ship his parents had died trying to protect. Because I know what it's like to be alone in the galaxy. Zara's bioluminescent patches began to glow more brightly, a sign of strong emotion among her people. You would do this? Truly? If you want me to, Marcus said. It won't be easy. This ship isn't exactly a luxury cruiser, and the work I do takes us to some rough places. But you'd have a home and time to grow up without someone trying to buy and sell you. Lyra stood up suddenly and hugged him, her Zephyrian strength surprising him. Yes, she said fiercely. Yes, we want this. Kira and Zara joined the embrace, and Marcus found himself holding three alien children who had somehow become his responsibility. He'd woken up that morning as a lonely cargo runner barely making ends meet. Now he was, what? A father? A guardian? A protector? Okay then, he said when they let him go. Okay. We'll make this work somehow. Over the next few days, while waiting for his ship parts to arrive, Marcus began to understand what he'd gotten himself into. Lyra was the oldest at 16 standard years, with a fierce intelligence and a talent for languages that made her invaluable as a translator. Kira was 15, with the natural agility and reflexes of her species, plus an intuitive understanding of mechanical systems that impressed even Marcus. Zara was the youngest at 14, but her Viridian biology gave her unique abilities. She could sense electromagnetic fields and detect structural weaknesses in metal and composites just by touching them. They were also traumatized, malnourished, and completely unprepared for life aboard a working starship. The first night, Kara had a nightmare and accidentally clawed gouges in the bulkhead while trying to escape imaginary pursuers. Lyra refused to eat anything she hadn't seen Marcus prepare himself, convinced that any food she didn't watch being made might be drugged. Zara couldn't sleep in the dark and kept her bioluminescent patches glowing all night, which interfered with the ship's sensors. But they adapted faster than Marcus had expected. By the third day, Lyra was helping him navigate the station's bureaucracy to get legal temporary custody papers. Kara had figured out how to recalibrate the artificial gravity generators to run more efficiently. Zara discovered that the ship's hull had microscopic stress fractures that could have caused catastrophic failure during their next hyperspace jump. How did you know that? Marcus asked her, running his hand along the section of hull she'd indicated. His instruments confirmed what she'd told him, the metal was weakened almost to the breaking point. Zara shrugged. It feels wrong. Like a song that is not in harmony. Marcus shook his head in amazement. He'd been flying ships for 15 years and never learned to read metal fatigue by touch. The repairs would cost him most of his remaining credits, but it was better than dying in hyperspace. The parts for his hyperdrive finally arrived, along with the materials needed to fix the hull damage. Marcus worked for 2 days straight installing everything while the girls helped however they could. It felt good to have crew again, even if they weren't exactly trained spacers. On their last night on Nexus Station, Marcus gathered them in the main cabin for what he'd started thinking of as a family meeting. The girls sat on the small couch he'd installed, while he took his usual spot in the pilot's chair. Tomorrow we leave here, he said. I want to make sure you understand what that means. Once we go into hyperspace, there's no going back. You'll be part of my crew, officially. That means you help with ship operations, you follow orders during emergencies, and you trust me to keep us all safe. Where will we go? Lyra asked. Outer Rim colonies, mostly. Places that need cargo hauled and don't ask too many questions about paperwork. We'll make enough to keep the ship running and put food on the table. It won't make us rich, but it's honest work. Kara leaned forward. What about our futures? We cannot be cargo runners forever. Marcus nodded. That's the other thing I wanted to talk about.
While we're traveling, we're going to work on your education.
All three of you are smart, but you'll need more than that to make it in the galaxy. I'm going to teach you everything I know about starships, navigation, trade law, and anything else that might be useful."
"And then?" Zara asked quietly.
"And then, when you're old enough and trained enough, you decide what you want to do with your lives. Maybe you stay with me and we become a real shipping company.
Maybe you go to university somewhere. Maybe you start your own businesses. The point is, it'll be your choice."
The girls looked at each other, then back at him.
Lyra spoke for all of them. "We choose to stay with you, Marcus Chen. You gave us hope when we had none. You gave us home when we were lost. We will be the best crew you have ever had." Marcus smiled. "I'm sure you will be. But remember, you're not just my crew. You're my family now."
And family looks out for each other.
The next morning, the Wandering Star lifted off from Nexus Station with a crew of 4 instead of 1.
Marcus filed their departure with station control as a routine cargo run to the Kepler system, where he'd heard there was demand for medical supplies from the core worlds. As they cleared the station's mass shadow and prepared to jump to hyperspace, Marcus looked back at his 3 new crew members.
Lyra was studying star charts with intense concentration. Kara was running diagnostics on the engine systems. Zara had her hand on the hull, monitoring its structural integrity during the acceleration phase.
6 months ago, they'd been slaves with no hope and no future. Now they were free citizens of the galaxy with their whole lives ahead of them. It wasn't much yet, but it was a beginning.
"Hyperspace in 60 seconds, Marcus announced. "Everyone ready?"
3 voices answered in unison, "Ready, Captain." Marcus grinned and activated the hyperdrive. The Wandering Star leaped into the swirling colors of hyperspace, carrying its unusual family toward whatever adventures waited among the stars. In the months that followed, they would face pirates and corrupt officials, mechanical failures and dangerous cargoes. They would learn to trust each other completely, to work as a team, and to call the cramped confines of an aging freighter home.
The 3 girls would grow from frightened refugees into confident young women with skills that would make them valuable anywhere in the galaxy.
But that first jump into hyperspace was when it really began, the moment when 3 disposable alien children became something new.
They became human by choice, not by blood.
They became a family forged in the crucible of shared hardship and mutual dependence. They became proof that sometimes the most important things in life can't be bought or sold, they can only be given freely, from one being to another, across the vast darkness between the stars. The galaxy was a harsh place for the small and weak. But it was also vast enough for second chances, if you knew where to look for them. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, second chances came looking for you in the form of a gruff cargo captain with a soft heart and a ship called the Wandering Star. 3 years had passed since Marcus Chen had found 3 frightened alien girls hiding behind a dumpster on Nexus Station. The Wandering Star still looked like the same beat-up freighter from the outside, but inside it had been transformed into something resembling a proper home. The cargo hold had been divided into 3 small but comfortable bedrooms, the common area had been expanded with salvaged furniture, and the galley now actually deserved the name instead of being just a food dispenser and a table. Captain Marcus Chen stood in the cockpit, watching Lyra navigate their approach to Meridian Colony. The young Zephyrian woman had grown from a scared 16-year-old into a confident 19-year-old who could pilot the ship as well as Marcus himself. Her violet eyes were focused intently on the navigation display as she made micro-adjustments to their trajectory. Coming up on final approach vector, Lyra announced, her accented galactic standard now fluent and confident.
"Docking Bay 7 has been assigned. Meridian Control confirms we have clearance for atmospheric entry."
"Nice work," Marcus said, settling into the co-pilot's seat.
"Take us in." In the 3 years since leaving Nexus Station, they had become a real crew.
The Wandering Star had a reputation now as a reliable transport that could get cargo anywhere in the Outer Rim, no questions asked. More importantly, they had built a life together that none of them had thought possible.
Kara appeared in the cockpit doorway, wiping grease from her hands with a rag. At 18, the Kithani woman had grown into her lean, muscular frame.
Her cat-like reflexes and intuitive understanding of mechanical systems had made her one of the best ship engineers in the sector.
Engines are running smooth, she reported. The new plasma converters are working perfectly. We should have enough power for 3 full hyperspace jumps without refueling. Excellent, Marcus said.
Where's Zara? Inspecting the cargo, Kara replied.
She found some stress fractures in Container 7 yesterday and wanted to make sure they haven't gotten worse during transit. Marcus nodded.
Zara had developed her natural Viridian abilities into something approaching genius. At 17, she could diagnose structural problems in any ship, station, or building just by walking through it. Her bioluminescent patches had grown brighter over the years, and she'd learned to control them consciously. She was also the most thoughtful of the 3, often serving as a mediator when the others disagreed about something. The wandering star descended through Meridian Colony's thin atmosphere, past the orbital docking platforms and down to the surface port. Meridian was one of the newer colonies, established only 50 years ago by a consortium of species looking for a fresh start away from the crowded core worlds.
It was exactly the kind of place where an independent freight crew could make good money. Smooth as silk, Marcus said as Lyra set them down in the assigned bay. You've gotten good at this.
Lyra smiled, her silver facial markings shifting slightly with the expression.
I have had an excellent teacher.
The cargo bay doors opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and Zara emerged from the hold. The young Viridian woman had grown tall and graceful, her green-tinted skin healthy and vibrant. The dim, sickly glow Marcus remembered from their first meeting had been replaced by confident radiance.
Container 7 is stable, she reported.
The fractures have not spread, but I recommend we replace it before taking any high-acceleration cargo.
Noted, Marcus said. What's our cargo status for unloading?
15 containers of medical supplies for the colony hospital, Lyra said, checking her datapad.
8 containers of manufacturing equipment for the new industrial complex. And 3 containers of luxury goods for the merchant quarter. Good manifest, Marcus said. Should be a quick turnaround. Kira, any maintenance issues while we're here?
Nothing urgent, the Kithani woman replied. But I'd like to recalibrate the navigation sensors and update our star chart database. We're 6 months behind on the latest gravitational anomaly reports.
Marcus nodded.
They'd learned to take advantage of every port stop for routine maintenance. In the outer rim, you couldn't count on finding replacement parts or qualified technicians when you needed them.
Self-reliance was the key to survival. The unloading went smoothly.
The colony's cargo handlers were efficient and professional, and their equipment was in good repair.
Marcus had learned to judge a colony's economic health by the quality of their dock facilities. Meridian was clearly doing well.
While the others supervised the cargo transfer, Marcus went to the harbor master's office to file their departure manifest and look for return cargo. The harbor master was a middle-aged human woman named Director Walsh, who greeted him with the kind of professional courtesy that meant she'd checked their reputation before they arrived.
Captain Chen, she said, standing to shake his hand. Welcome to Meridian. I understand you have an excellent record for on-time deliveries. We do our best, Marcus replied. Any cargo heading out system?
Walsh consulted her datapad.
Several possibilities.
There's a shipment of rare minerals going to the Vega system, but that's a high-value cargo requiring bonded transport. We're bonded, Marcus said, pulling out his certification. It had taken 2 years and most of their savings to get the insurance and legal documentation necessary for high-value shipments, but it had opened up much more profitable routes.
Excellent, Walsh said, examining his credentials. There's also a diplomatic pouch going to the Centauri embassy on New Geneva. And... She hesitated.
There's a rather unusual request that came in this morning.
Unusual how? Walsh pulled up another file. A group of refugees from the Corvin system.
They've been here for 6 months, but they've finally saved enough for passage to the Refugee Relocation Center on Haven Station. The thing is, they specifically requested human transport. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach.
Why specifically human?
Apparently they've had bad experiences with non-human ship crews. They're Andromedan refugees, their system was annexed by the hegemony 8 months ago. The usual story: species deemed unsuitable for self-governance and forcibly relocated. The same story as Zara's people, Marcus thought. The Andromedan hegemony had been expanding aggressively for the past decade, always with the same justification. Small, peaceful species were declared too primitive or too dangerous to govern themselves, then conquered and their populations scattered across the galaxy as laborers and servants.
How many refugees? Marcus asked. 12 adults, 8 children, Walsh replied.
They can pay standard passenger rates, but they're asking for guaranteed safe passage and discreet handling of their documentation. Marcus knew he should ask more questions about the legal implications and potential complications. Instead, he found himself thinking about 3 frightened alien girls he'd found hiding behind a dumpster 3 years ago.
"We'll take them," he said. Walsh looked surprised. "You don't want to discuss rates? Or check with your crew?" "Standard refugee rates are fine," Marcus said. "When do they want to leave?" "As soon as possible, apparently. They're concerned about hegemony agents tracking them down."
Marcus felt that cold feeling in his stomach get worse.
"Are they in immediate danger?"
Walsh hesitated.
"There have been reports of hegemony ships in the area."
"Nothing confirmed, but the refugees are nervous."
Marcus made a decision. "Can you have them aboard by this evening? We can be ready to depart at dawn."
"I'll contact them immediately," Walsh said.
"Captain, I should mention, these people have been through a lot.
They're traumatized, suspicious, and some of them are in poor health.
You might want to prepare your crew." Marcus smiled grimly.
"Director, my crew has experience with traumatized refugees. We'll take good care of them." When Marcus returned to the ship, he found his crew finishing the cargo loading and conducting their routine maintenance checks. He called them together in the common area for one of their regular planning meetings.
"Change of plans," he announced. "We're taking on passengers.
20 Andromedan refugees, leaving tomorrow morning." The 3 women exchanged glances. They'd transported refugees before, but never that many at once. Their ship was equipped for cargo, not passengers.
"What accommodations do they need?" Lyra asked practically.
"Basic transport to Haven Station," Marcus replied. "Food, water, somewhere to sleep."
"They're paying standard rates."
"The cargo hold is full," Kira pointed out. "Where will 20 people sleep?"
Marcus had been thinking about that.
"We'll need to reconfigure the cargo layout. Stack the containers higher, create temporary passenger space in the remaining area. It won't be comfortable, but it'll work for a few days."
Zara looked thoughtful.
"Andromedans are silicon-based, not carbon-based like most species. They'll need different atmospheric conditions and food supplements."
"Can we accommodate that?" Marcus asked.
"Yes," Zara said confidently. "But we'll need to modify the environmental systems. And we should pick up some silicon-based nutritional supplements at the colony market."
"Do it," Marcus said. "Lyra, can you help Zara with the atmospheric modifications?"
"Kira, work on reconfiguring the cargo hold for passenger space." As his crew dispersed to their tasks, Marcus remained in the common area, thinking. Taking on 20 refugees was a significant risk, both financially and legally. If something went wrong, if the hegemony really was tracking these people, the wandering star could end up in serious trouble. But he kept thinking about 3 frightened girls who had nowhere to go, and how his decision to help them had turned out to be the best thing he'd ever done.
Sometimes you had to take risks for the right reasons.
The refugees arrived that evening just as the artificial daylight began to fade. Marcus watched them file up the cargo ramp, 20 beings who looked like they were made of living crystal, their translucent bodies refracting the ship's lights into rainbow patterns. They moved slowly, carefully, carrying small bundles of personal possessions. The adults ranged from young to elderly, but all showed signs of malnutrition and stress. The children stayed close to their parents, their crystalline forms dim with exhaustion. Marcus could see the same haunted look in their eyes that he'd once seen in Lyra, Kira, and Zara. Their leader was an older Andromedan named Crystal in Song of Morning, which his translator shortened to Song. She approached Marcus with the careful dignity of someone who had lost everything but refused to lose her pride. "Captain Chen," she said in accented galactic standard.
"We are grateful for your assistance.
Our people have heard that humans can be trusted to keep their word. We'll get you to Haven Station safely," Marcus promised. "My crew has experience with refugee transport."
"You'll be in good hands." Son's crystalline form brightened slightly. "Your crew, they are human also?" Marcus smiled. "Not exactly. But they understand what it's like to be far from home."
As the refugees settled into the makeshift passenger area, Marcus's crew worked with quiet efficiency to make them comfortable. Lyra helped distribute food and water, speaking to each family in their own language.
Kira checked the environmental systems to make sure the silicon-based atmosphere supplements were working correctly.
Zara moved through the passenger area, using her structural sense to make sure the hastily installed bunks and partitions were safe and stable. Marcus watched his crew work and felt a familiar surge of pride. They'd grown from desperate refugees themselves into confident, capable women who understood exactly what these Andromedans were going through. They worked not just with professional competence but with genuine compassion, making sure each family had what they needed and felt safe aboard the ship. As night fell and the passengers settled down to rest, Marcus gathered his crew for a final briefing. They met in the cockpit, keeping their voices low. "Departure is scheduled for dawn," he said quietly. "Direct route to Haven Station, 4 days in hyperspace."
"Any concerns?" "The atmospheric system is working perfectly," Zara reported. "All structural modifications are secure. Environmental controls are stable," Kara added. "But I'm a little worried about power consumption.
20 additional life support systems are drawing more energy than I expected."
Marcus nodded. "Can we make it to Haven Station?"
"Yes," Kara said. "But we'll need to reduce power to non-essential systems. No recreational holoprograms, minimal lighting in unused areas, that sort of thing."
"Done," Marcus said. "Lyra, what about our route?"
"I've plotted the fastest course to Haven Station," Lyra replied.
"But I've also identified 3 alternative routes in case we run into trouble."
"The refugees are right to be worried about hegemony pursuit."
"You think they're really being tracked?" Marcus asked. Lyra's expression was grim. "The hegemony doesn't usually let potential laborers escape."
"They have a reputation for recapturing refugees and making examples of them."
Marcus felt that cold feeling in his stomach again.
He'd known this job was risky, but the full implications were just beginning to sink in.
If hegemony ships caught up with them, it wouldn't just be the refugees in danger.
His crew could be arrested as accomplices, his ship confiscated, their new life together destroyed.
"We knew this wasn't going to be simple," he said finally.
"But these people deserve a chance at freedom, just like you 3 did."
Kira's ears twitched, a sign of nervousness among her species. "What if we encounter hegemony ships?" Marcus considered the question. "We run. The Wandering Star isn't a warship, and we're not heroes.
Our job is to get our passengers to safety, not to fight battles we can't win."
Zara's bioluminescent patches pulsed thoughtfully.
"The refugees mentioned that some of their group are still missing.
Family members who were taken during the initial conquest."
"That's not our problem," Marcus said, though the words felt harsh even as he spoke them.
"We can't save everyone."
The 3 women looked at him with expressions he couldn't quite read.
Finally, Lyra spoke. "You saved us when you could have walked away."
"That changed everything for us." "This is different," Marcus protested.
"That was 3 people. This is..."
He gestured toward the passenger area.
"This could get us all killed."
"Yes," Zara said simply.
"It could.
But some things are worth the risk." Marcus stared at them, realizing that somewhere along the way, his crew had become better people than he was.
3 years ago, they'd been children he was protecting. Now they were adults who understood the moral implications of their choices more clearly than he did. "Get some rest," he said finally. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day."
As the others left the cockpit, Marcus remained alone with his thoughts.
Through the viewports, he could see Meridian Colony's lights twinkling in the darkness.
In a few hours, they'd lift off and commit themselves to a dangerous journey with uncertain outcomes. He thought about the refugees sleeping in his cargo hold, and the family members they'd left behind in hegemony captivity. He thought about the 3 alien girls who would become his daughters in all but blood, and how they'd grown into women who were willing to risk everything for strangers. Most of all, he thought about the moment 3 years ago when he'd had to decide between walking away from 3 hungry children or taking responsibility for their lives. That decision had led to this one, and whatever came next. Marcus Chen had spent his adult life avoiding complications and responsibilities. But sometimes complications found you anyway, and sometimes responsibilities chose you rather than the other way around. The question was whether you were brave enough to live up to them. Dawn was still 4 hours away, but Marcus began the pre-flight checklist anyway. By the time the others woke up, the Wandering Star would be ready to depart for Haven Station, carrying 20 refugees toward an uncertain freedom and a crew that was finally learning what it meant to be truly human. The hegemony destroyer Righteous Punishment hung in space like a metallic predator, its weapon ports gleaming in the light of Haven Station's star. Captain Marcus Chen stared at it through the Wandering Star's viewports and felt his blood turn to ice. They had been in hyperspace for 3 days, less than 12 hours from their destination, when the massive warship had dropped out of nowhere and ordered them to prepare for boarding. "All stop," came the cold voice over the communications channel. "Freighter Wandering Star, you are carrying stolen property of the Andromedan hegemony. Prepare to be boarded for inspection and cargo confiscation." Marcus looked back at his crew. Lyra sat at the navigation station, her violet eyes wide but determined. Kira crouched near the engineering console, her cat-like ears flat against her head in anger rather than fear. Zara stood by the communications panel, her bioluminescent patches pulsing in agitated patterns. "Options?" Marcus asked quietly. "We could run," Lyra said, checking her instruments. "If we dive into the gravity well of that gas giant, we might lose them in the atmospheric interference." "Their ship is faster than ours," Kira pointed out. "And they have weapons that could disable our engines before we reach the planet." "What about the refugees?" Zara asked. "Are we going to abandon them?" Marcus looked toward the cargo hold where 20 Andromedan refugees were waiting in terrified silence. Song had come forward when the hegemony ship first appeared, her crystalline form trembling with rage and fear. "They will take us back to the labor camps," she had said. "Or worse." The hegemony does not forgive escape attempts. In the 3 days since leaving Meridian Colony, Marcus had gotten to know the refugees better. They weren't just random civilians caught up in conquest, they were teachers, artists, engineers, doctors. People who had dedicated their lives to learning and creating, now branded as criminals for refusing to accept slavery. The families with children were the worst. Marcus had watched Kira teaching some of the younger Andromedans how to play simple games to pass the time. He'd seen Lyra helping the adults practice their galactic standard. Zara had spent hours with an elderly Andromedan poet, learning about the history and culture that the hegemony was trying to erase. "Captain Chen," the hegemony commander's voice crackled over the comm, "you have 60 seconds to comply with our boarding order. Resistance will be met with deadly force." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, thinking. 3 years ago, he'd been a man with no attachments, no responsibilities beyond his next cargo run. Now he had a crew that trusted him, passengers depending on him, and a choice that would define who he really was. "Lyra," he said quietly. "Send a general distress signal to Haven Station. Tell them we're under attack by hegemony forces in neutral space." "Done," Lyra replied, her fingers flying over the communications panel. "Kira, how much power can you give me?" The Kithani woman's eyes gleamed. "If I overload the plasma conduits and reroute power from life support, I can give you 120% of normal engine output for about 10 minutes before we start exploding." "Do it." "Zara, I need you to monitor structural integrity. If the ship starts coming apart, tell me immediately." The young Viridian woman nodded, placing her hands on the nearest bulkhead. "Ready, Captain." Marcus turned to the communications panel. "Hegemony vessel, this is Captain Marcus Chen of the independent freighter Wandering Star.
We are carrying legitimate passengers with valid documentation. You have no authority in neutral space. The response was immediate and harsh. Captain Chen, you are harboring stolen hegemony property.
Surrender now or face the consequences.
Stolen property?
Marcus's voice carried all the contempt he could muster. These are people, not cargo. They're free citizens seeking asylum.
Negative. The refugees are classified as valuable intellectual resources belonging to the hegemony.
They will be returned for proper utilization. Marcus felt something white-hot ignite in his chest.
Valuable intellectual resources.
That's what the hegemony called people resources to be utilized. It was the same mentality that had created the slave trade his crew had escaped from. Here's my counteroffer, Marcus said into the calm turnaround and, go home.
These people are under my protection now.
There was a pause.
Then, the hegemony commander's voice returned, colder than space itself. Captain Chen, you are one small freighter against a destroyer-class warship. Your protection is meaningless.
Maybe, Marcus admitted.
But, let me tell you something about humans. We're really stubborn about protecting people we care about.
Without waiting for a response, Marcus cut the communication channel and turned to his crew.
Kira, give me everything you've got. Lyra, plot an evasive course toward the gas giant.
Zara, tell our passengers to hold on to something. The wandering star leaped forward as Kira's modifications kicked in, acceleration pressing everyone back in their seats.
Through the viewports, Marcus watched the hegemony destroyer begin to turn, its massive bulk moving with surprising grace.
They're charging weapons, Lyra reported, her voice tense but steady.
Time to gas giant? Marcus asked.
7 minutes at current acceleration, Lyra replied. But, Captain, even if we make it, they'll just wait for us to come out. One problem at a time, Marcus said. The first energy blast lit up space around them, close enough to make the ship's hull ring like a bell. Marcus threw the freighter into a spiraling dive, using every trick he'd learned in 15 years of dodging pirates and customs inspectors. Hit to starboard shield generator, Kira reported.
Still functional, but not for long. Another blast, closer this time.
Marcus could smell ozone and burning insulation. The wandering star was never designed for this kind of treatment.
For minutes to the gas giant, Lyra called out.
From behind them came a sound Marcus had been dreading, the high-pitched whine of the hegemony ship's main weapons charging. Those guns could punch through their hull like paper.
Incoming missile lock, Lyra said, her voice tight with fear.
Marcus was about to order another evasive maneuver when Zara suddenly straightened up from the bulkhead she'd been monitoring.
Captain, I'm reading massive structural instabilities in the hegemony ship's weapon array. What kind of instabilities?
Their main gun has microfractures throughout the focusing assembly.
If they fire at full power.
Zara's words were cut off as the hegemony destroyer's main weapon fired. For a split second, a lance of energy brighter than a star reached toward the wandering star.
Then, the hegemony ship's entire forward section erupted in a chain of explosions as the damaged weapon array catastrophically overloaded. Holy stars, Kira breathed, watching the destroyer tumble away, trailing debris and atmosphere. Marcus stared in shock. How did you know that would happen? Zara's bioluminescent patches were pulsing rapidly with excitement.
I could feel the stress patterns in their hull from here. The weapon had been recently repaired, but badly.
Too much heat, not enough structural support. 2 minutes to gas giant, Lyra announced.
But, the immediate crisis had passed.
The hegemony destroyer was crippled, its crew focused on damage control rather than pursuit.
Marcus reduced power and brought the wandering star back on course toward Haven Station. This is Haven Station Control, a new voice crackled over the communications channel.
Freighter Wandering Star, we received your distress signal. Federal Protection Service ships are en route to your location. Marcus sagged back in his pilot's chair, adrenaline leaving him shaky. Haven Station Control, this is Captain Chen. Crisis is resolved. Hegemony vessel has suffered mechanical difficulties and is no longer pursuing. Understood, Captain. You're cleared for priority docking. Medical teams are standing by.
As they approached Haven Station, Marcus looked back at his crew. 3 alien women who had started as refugees themselves, who had grown into the finest crew he'd ever served with. They had risked their lives not for money or glory, but because it was the right thing to do.
Good work, all of you, he said simply. The docking with Haven Station went smoothly.
Federal immigration officers boarded to process the refugees' asylum applications, but their manner was professional and respectful. This was what the system was supposed to look like when it worked properly.
Marcus watched Song and the other Andromedans say their goodbyes.
The elderly poet that Zara had befriended pressed a small crystal sculpture into her hands, a work of art that somehow captured the play of light through crystalline forms.
For the young woman who understands the music of structure, the poet said in heavily accented galactic standard. May you always hear the harmony in chaos.
As the refugees filed off the ship toward their new lives, Marcus gathered his crew in the common area. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, processing what they'd been through.
So, Marcus said finally. That was terrifying. Kira's ears twitched, and what he'd learned was the Kithany equivalent of a grin. But we won. We got lucky, Marcus corrected. If Zara hadn't spotted that structural weakness. It was not luck, Zara said quietly. It was knowledge. Experience. The ability to see things others cannot see.
These are gifts that come from growing up strong instead of growing up safe. Marcus looked at her, struck by the wisdom in her words. 3 years ago, she'd been a frightened 14-year-old who glowed dimly in the shadows behind a dumpster. Now she was a confident young woman who could read the structural integrity of starships by touch.
The hegemony will send other ships, Lyra pointed out.
They do not give up easily when valuable resources are involved.
Marcus nodded.
Which means there will be more refugees.
More people who need transport to safety. Are you suggesting we become full-time refugee runners? Kira asked. Marcus thought about it.
Regular cargo runs were safer, more profitable, and much less likely to involve being shot at by destroyer-class warships.
But they were also less important, less meaningful.
I'm suggesting we become who we're supposed to be, he said finally. 3 years ago, I found 3 girls who needed help. Today, those girls saved 20 people from slavery.
Maybe that's not a coincidence. Zara's bioluminescent patches began to glow more brightly. You think we were meant for this?
I think, Marcus said slowly, that the galaxy is full of small, weak species that get crushed by larger, more powerful ones. And I think that sometimes, small groups of determined people can make a difference. Over the next few days, while the Wandering Star underwent repairs and resupply, Marcus researched refugee rescue operations. It turned out there was a loose network of independent ships and crews doing exactly what they'd just done, carrying escaped slaves and political refugees to safety. The pay was irregular and the risks were enormous. Ships got captured, crews got arrested or killed. But the work was necessary, and there were never enough volunteers. There's a group called the Underground Railroad, Marcus told his crew as they sat around the galley table.
Named after something from Earth history.
They coordinate rescue missions and provide legal support for refugee transport.
What would we need to do? Lyra asked. Modify the ship for regular passenger transport. Get additional legal certifications. Learn about the specific needs of different refugee populations.
Kira was already sketching modifications on her datapad. We could install proper passenger quarters in the forward cargo bay. Add emergency life support systems, medical facilities. It would mean giving up regular cargo runs, Marcus warned.
Less steady income, more dangerous work.
The 3 women exchanged glances.
Then, Zara spoke for all of them.
Captain, 3 years ago you gave us the most precious gift in the galaxy, a future. Now we have the chance to give that same gift to others.
The hegemony isn't the only threat out there, Lyra added.
There are slavers, pirates, corrupt governments.
The galaxy is full of people who need help.
Marcus looked around the table at his crew, his family. They'd grown from frightened children into remarkable young women, each with skills that made her valuable anywhere in the galaxy. They could have chosen comfortable, safe careers. Instead, they were volunteering for a life of constant danger. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "Once we commit to this path, there's no going back.
We'll make enemies of some very powerful people." Kara's tail lashed with determination. "Good. Some people should be enemies."
Marcus laughed despite himself.
"All right then. I'll contact the Underground Railroad tomorrow. See what they need from us."
As the others headed to their quarters for the night, Marcus remained in the common area, looking out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there were millions of people trapped in slavery, political oppression, and economic desperation. The number was too large to comprehend, the problem too vast for one small ship and crew to solve.
But that wasn't the point.
The point was that some problems were worth fighting even if you couldn't solve them completely. Some principles were worth defending even if you were vastly outnumbered.
Some people were worth protecting even if it cost you everything.
Marcus Chen had started his adult life as a selfish man with no attachments and no responsibilities beyond his next paycheck. But life had other plans for him. It had given him 3 alien daughters who had taught him what family really meant. It had shown him that sometimes the most important cargo a ship could carry was hope.
The wandering star would fly again soon, carrying new refugees toward new lives.
They would face pirates and warships, corrupt officials and impossible odds.
Some missions would succeed, others would fail.
People they cared about would get hurt or captured or killed. But they would keep flying, because that's what humans did when faced with injustice.
They got stubborn.
They refused to give up. They protected the weak and defied the powerful, and sometimes, just sometimes, they made a difference. 3 years ago, Marcus had found 3 discarded alien girls hiding behind a dumpster on a forgotten station. Now those girls had grown into women who understood that the most human thing you could do was refuse to abandon people who needed help. The galaxy was vast and dangerous and often cruel. But it was also full of second chances, if you were brave enough to take them. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, those second chances came with a crew that felt like family and a ship that felt like home. Marcus Chen smiled and began planning their next mission. Somewhere out there, people were waiting for rescue.
The wandering star would find them. After all, it's what humans do.